Today is November 30th, I have 8 cards to show you from Kobolds and Catacombs, so let's get into them. First up is Possessed Lackey, 5 mana 2/2 rare warlock minion with the death rattle, recruit a demon. Recruiting doesn't activate the battle cries, which for most minions would be a bad thing, but there are actually a lot of demons with negative battle cries, so recruiting them is a smart way to get around this issue. In fact, I think this is one of my favorite type of recruits so far. I just think the requirement makes the most sense, and it gives me a little bit more confidence that the poor stats might be okay in a deck built with this card in mind. But I think the card has two major problems. It's a death rattle, and you can't put the strong early game demons in your deck. Death rattle means you're spending 5 mana now to hopefully get rewarded with better stats later. Not only is it slow, but you also risk not getting the death rattle off. And the 2/2 stats means you probably want to get close to an average of 5/5 stats from a demon, making Lackey 5 mana for 7/7 in total. I think this could make the card work, but now you probably don't want to run the strong early game demons because if you recruit them, Possessed Lackey is probably played at a loss. Still, summoning a demon does add value to Blood Reaver Gul'dan's battlecry, so this card could help speed up that process. Now, in a deck of just a few big demons, maybe you can throw this in there. Maybe in a deck of a lot of demons, you can just stack the odds in your favor of getting a good statted minion. But I'm still concerned how slow this card is being a death rattle, and I think it's too inconsistent to work in any deck besides one that's given up early game demons, and I don't think Possessed Lackey is worth that. Next up is Dry Whisker Armor, 2 mana 2/2 rare warrior minion with the battlecry for each enemy minion gain 2 armor. It's simple, but pretty good. It's not a great turn 2 play, but maybe you can get 4 to 6 armor if you're playing against aggro, which is good. The maximum armor you can get from this card is 14, which would be good in Control Warrior, but the problem is you probably don't want to get into a situation where your opponent's board is full if you're playing Control Warrior. Maybe you can wait a few turns and bait enough enemy minions out to then play Dry Whisker Armorer and then Brawl. That's a pretty good combo. And this card even combos well with Cornered Sentry, but I think the main use for this card is another way for Warrior to gain more armor to use their fun new armor cards. And I don't think there's really any warrior right now that can use Dry Whisker Armorer, but I think it's a good card, so I would bet it will see competitive play in future metas. Next is Lesser Diamond Spellstone, 7 mana rare priest spell that resurrects 2 different friendly minions. Cast 4 spells to upgrade. And when you upgrade this card in your hand, it resurrects 3 minions and then 4. So like other resurrect cards, a staple of priest, this card will summon randomly from the pool of minions that have died. This means in a normal priest deck, resummoning 3 or 4 minions is pretty decent. But in Big Priest, where the only minions you have run are Barns or, wait for it, big minions, resummoning just 2 minions is worth anywhere from 16 to 19 mana. Now the way the card is worded, it seems like different friendly minion means no matter how many friendly obsidian statues die in your game, it's only going to resummon 1 at most. And this is fine for Big Priest because I don't think they really have time to upgrade this card. Big Priest is all about getting big value out early enough that your opponent can't really come back. And while Big Priest runs a lot of spells, they probably don't really care about upgrading this card because they're getting enough value as it is, and they might not even have 3 or 4 different minions to resummon. I think Diamond Spellstone is another respawning tool for Big Priest. It's going to make the deck stronger and possibly allow them to go a little bit longer in games. Peter Whalen, the Hearthstone designer that revealed the card, said this was one of the spellstones that's supposed to add spice to a deck you might already be playing. I feel like this is 50% true and 50% wrong. I think it's designed well in that hopefully some Big Priests will run this card and some won't. It might be too slow against a lot of matchups, so you might end up taking this card out, but if you end up in a mirror matchup against another Big Priest, then the player that has 2 Diamond Spellstones is probably going to win the game. My problem is I don't think people will be too encouraged to upgrade this card, so really the card is just a 7 mana resummoning spell. Personally, it's not spicy enough for my taste. Next is Emerald Spellstone, 5 mana rare hunter spell that summons 2 3/3 wolves. Play a secret to upgrade. Oh no. I'm not falling for another secret or control hunter. I mean, it seems kind of good. Just 1 secret gets you 5 mana for 9/9 stats, and then just 1 more for 12/12 stats. All of this for just 5 mana? I think my one concern is 3 health is pretty easily removed with a board clear, but if you want a control hunter to work, they're going to have some powerful cards that can stay on board, and in a control matchup these wolves are not going to survive. Liam Neeson all up in them, you know what I'm saying? Comparing this to Warrior's Mithrid Spellstone, which fully upgraded summons 3 5/5s, I'd argue that the mana and requirements are better for Emerald Spellstone, but Mithril's stat reward is dispersed in a way that fits control better. 5 mana spells are tough to fit into aggro decks, and spellstones are slow for tempo, so if I don't think Emerald Spellstone really fits in Control Hunter, then I don't think it's gonna work. Next is Onyx Spellstone, 5 mana rare spell for Rogue that destroys 1 random enemy minion. Play 3 Death Rattle cards to upgrade, and the upgrade leads to destroying 2 and then 3 random enemy minions. So Control Death Rattle Rogue? I think the starting spell is probably the worst of all spellstones so far. It's a 5-mana deadly shot in a deck that can do the same job much better. And playing Death Rattle cards? Well, they've tried to get Death Rattle to work in Rogue, but there's so many powerful Rogue class cards that it's not really worth forcing them. I think you might be able to get 6 Death Rattles fairly cleanly into a deck, but I'm not really expecting to be able to draw those Death Rattle cards to then be able to upgrade the spellstone twice with only those Death Rattles. And last thing, I don't think Rogue really needs this. If Death Rattle Rogue is truly on the rise, then why not throw this in? But there's already enough strong removal that isn't as clunky as Onyx, so I think people will rather play those. Next is Val'anyr, the 6-mana 4/2 legendary paladin weapon with Death Rattle. Give a minion in your hand plus 4/2. When it dies, re-equip this. And to add, when it gives your minion the 4/2 buff, when you play it, it also gives you the Death Rattle that re-equips this weapon. So this card seems really good. It's like a better tentacle for arms that can do more damage and you don't have to pay for it more than once. It's kind of a crazy back and forth where to get the most value out of the card, you want to break it and then have one of your minions die. And maybe that's actually a sign that the card isn't really too insane. Because besides the expensive cost, it's also pretty slow. So basically you equip the weapon and attack, and at the start of your next turn you can attack again, and the weapon's Death Rattle then buffs a minion, and you can play that minion on that turn. So then by your third turn that minion can now attack, so you can trade that minion in, and you get the weapon back, and you can attack with that weapon. 16 attack over 3 turns. It's still pretty good. I'm actually concerned that the 4/2 minion buff might be a little bit weak. It's great for charge minions, but for more control style deck that this card's long-term value favors, probably a 3/3 stat distribution would be better to help with trades, and as good as it is to have a 4/2 weapon, it's probably better just to keep a minion alive. I think it's good, but it's slow and expensive, which leads me to believe it would best fit in control. We'll see if Control Paladin works out, but I'm definitely a fan of the design. In fact, there's a fan-made weapon from this week's Top Hearthstone Cards of the Week that gives minions Death Rattle to buff the weapon. And I even mentioned at the end of the review that we'll have to see what Blizzard does for Paladin's weapon, so now that it's been revealed, you be the judge on which weapon you'd rather have in the game. Next is Twilight's Call, 3-mana rare priest spell that reads, summon 1/1 copies of 2 friendly Death Rattle minions that died this game. So Death Rattle Quest Priest hasn't really seen much love from the cards released so far, because the card says summoning the 1/1s count towards the quest. So basically you can use Twilight's Call like how you used Mirage Caller on Death Rattle minions, except now it's twice as effective towards completing your quest. But I think it's actually a really smart card to speed up the quest and make it more playable. There were some high hopes for Shallow Gravedigger to work in Priest Quest like Stonehill Defender has worked in Quest Warrior, but the card's stats are just so bad. Now you could put Shallow Gravedigger in your Quest Priest, and then when it dies you could summon 2 1/1s of it with Twilight's Call, and now you nearly have enough Death Rattles to win the game. Still, I don't think Shallow Gravedigger is a good choice for consistency. Now, depending on the Death Rattle, is the 3-mana 2/2 stats worth it? 2 1/1s are pretty easy to get rid of, but the Death Rattles aren't terrible in Priest, and if it leads to the Quest reward, there's no reason to leave this card out. I'm not convinced that Quest Priest will be competitive, but Twilight's Call will be a good addition to really give players a more realistic chance at completing the quest efficiently, and without having to include terrible Death Rattle cards. But last up is Dragon Caller Elena, 9-mana 3/3 legendary mage minion with the battlecry, summon a 5/5 dragon for each spell you've cast this game that costs 5 or more. So this must have been one of the cards yesterday's Deck of Wonders is meant to synergize with. And checking the wording, yes, I think Deck of Wonders does count because it says cast. So does that mean Yogg counts towards Alana? It's a little bit fuzzy because the ownership of the spells or who casts them is counted as Yogg-Saron's most of the time, but other times for card text purposes, it's counted as yours. You can read into how Yogg works. I'd recommend reading the Wikipedia page, but let's get back to the card. 9-mana 3/3, best case situation, having played 6 5 or more costing spells, the battlecry gets you 33 in stats on the board. Not so bad. And 5/5s are pretty well statted, they're kind of tough to get off the board. Well, then how easy is it to cast 6 5 or more costing spells in Mage? Well, there are a couple of good ones you could use. I think the problem is to make Elena work, it has to be between 4 and 6 5/5 dragons, which means probably 6 to 8 5 or more costing spells. Some may think that 9 mana, 18 stats with the battlecry just spawning 3 5/5s is good enough, but personally, I think you really want to get 4 or more to make this card worth being in a control deck, because other control decks will probably be able to deal with 3 5/5s. And that's why I think it isn't really meant for control. It doesn't really fit into Elemental Mage, which is what they seem to be pushing in the control direction. So my best guess is mid-range tempo deck that runs Deck Deck of Wonders, that's kind of all the deck idea is. Run Elena, Deck of Wonders, some other synergy cards, and good value cards to get a nice curve. It's not really something I think will work, but the idea being you hold on to board control with your spells and let Deck of Wonders do their thing, and it all charges to your final push with Dragoncaller Alana. I think any general deck just putting Alana in with 4 expensive spells is going to be too slow and not consistent enough to be worth it. If this card can fit in a control deck that runs 6 or 7 expensive spells, then I could see it working out, but I really don't see a deck like that. Still, the potential 33 stats really makes me want to think Dragoncaller Alana is a good card, but alas, I cannot. Well, that's all the cards released today. There's a playlist if you missed any of the ones before. Top Hearthstone Cards of the Week is a video I also mentioned before, and it's right here. And feel free to subscribe if you want to hear my opinion as more cards come out. I'll be back tomorrow, but until then, ta-ta.